Alzheimer's can happen to anyone and in any family. More and more families are sharing their stories. And joining us now in our Washington studio with their story, Jill Eikenberry and Michael Tucker. You may remember their roles as a married couple in the TV series L.A. Law. Well, it just so happens they're also married in real life. And one of the real-life realities they're facing is the care of Jill's 92-year-old mother, Laura, who has Alzheimer's. Michael has written a book about the experience, Family Meals, Coming Together to Care for an Aging Parent. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks, good to be here. Thanks.
Well, Jill, let's just start with that decision to share your story. Was it a tough one to go public? Because so many people go through this, but often they go through it alone or without talking about it.
It was a difficult decision, and actually Mike is a writer and he loves to write about you know, things that are happening. He felt like this was a really good story, and I was reluctant at first because I thought, well, this is a very private story, and in fact, you know, I was afraid that there would be a sort of embarrassment or shame on my mother's part if she were to know that we were doing this. Mm-hmm. So it was, I wrestled with it a little bit, but what we found, in fact, is that as we go around and talk about the book around the country, is that like anything else, when you share your story, you get something out of it because you find out how many other people are going through it. But you also feel like you're giving, you know, to other people by telling them what you went through. And the fact is, we're kind of in a way out the other side of the really difficult time. So that's always a nice story to hear.
Yes, that is a good story to hear.
And that there's a resolution. You know,
but it's been a journey, and it's a stressful journey too. That's one of the things we were discussing earlier on the program, caregiver stress, and it's part of your journey too, isn't it?
When we were talking around the country, we were telling our story, and afterwards in the Q&A, a social worker stood up and she said, I want to underline something. Jill, you are not the caregiver, you are the daughter, and you have a caregiver who is a pro. And because otherwise your mother will get terrible care, and you'll be a bad daughter. You know, focus on what you do, you know, and have someone, if possible, a pro.
So let's tell people some of the story. Let's go back right to the late 1990s. Your mother's living in California. She's having memory loss, confusion. What were you thinking at the time?
Well, she was married at the time to her second husband, and he was starting to have a lot of back pain. He was starting to talk about being ready to die. He was in his 90s. And I knew she was terrified, and I knew he was terrified for her because he thought that she was, you know, starting to lose a lot of mental capacity, and he didn't know what she was going to do.
But you were still in a little bit of denial.
I was in complete denial. In fact, I thought that he was undermining her. I thought that his, you know, he was looking over her shoulder all the time to see if she was going to make a mistake, and that was making it worse. But in fact, what I found out when he died was that he had been covering for her, and she was a lot farther down the slippery slope than I thought, and that was quite a revelation. But you know, I continued to deny it. I continued to need to believe that once she recovered from his death, and
moving
that
her
she'd
across
be better.
the country.
Yeah, we moved her across the country, and I thought once she settles in, we moved her to New York. I thought once she settles in, I'll be able to take her to the Metropolitan for lunch, and we'll, you know, go to matinees on Broadway. And I really needed to believe that.
You had a vision that, of course, I'll move Mom here and everything will be fine. And of course, Michael, you were very involved, of course, as the son-in-law and spouse of, and you're observing all of this.
But also a bit, you know, a bit of a naysayer. I knew from my experience with my mother, who died of Alzheimer's about 7 years before that, that moving someone in that condition is the very worst thing that you can do. You know, if you can keep a person where they are. So you were concerned about taking her away from the familiar.
Right.
And then it comes up, the apartment across the, well, we should point out, the first retirement home you put her in just was not a good fit. And that happens. They didn't have the services that she needed.
Right. And she was in a particularly difficult
stage.
She didn't know where she was really. She doesn't hear well. They couldn't get her hearing aid in, and she was swinging at people.
Which often happens because she's angry. She realizes she's lost control.
And it's as a result, a lot of the aides at the retirement community didn't want to work with her, and I would hear people whispering about her, and this was just mortifying to me. And I thought, if she knew this, you know, it was just So I was running to this assisted care facility on the premises saying, you have to find me somebody that knows how to work with Alzheimer's patients. This is not, you know. And I said, half the people here have dementia, you know, so why don't you have someone? So I was just beside myself.
So then the apartment literally across the hall from you becomes vacant.
Literally across the hall.
And you're honest enough to say that you were worried about what it would mean to your world and your life, right?
I was worried, you know, when we first moved Laura to New York, that, you know, Jill is a different person when she's around her mother. Or was. I must say that that's not true anymore.
And we'll talk about that evolution, sure.
Yeah.
Because you were anxious.
I was very worried what was going to happen with my life.
It wasn't so much my mother he was worried about, it was me.
Right.
I can handle
How am I
Laura.
gonna be? 'Cause always so nervous, always, you know, I was an only child. I'm the one that has to take care of her.
You felt you had to take care of her.
Yeah, yeah.
And you also learned that a lot of issues from childhood do come out when these roles are reversed, and so you were experiencing all of that.
I was. And
You know,
it
an
was
amazing thing, I just remembered this story, I'm not even sure it's in the book, but when we moved her across the hall, Marcia came to me and she said, I know that you need your privacy. Yeah, she's our gem.
Your saint.
Our
Right.
saint.
Yeah.
Well, saint, I don't know. She's terrific.
But she's a gem.
And she said, I know you're concerned about your privacy, and part of my job is to make sure that you have it, that Laura lives here. She doesn't live in your apartment, and it really worked out well. It became not an intrusion on me in any way.
But that was a key, wasn't it? You had to find the right caregivers. You had to navigate the Medicaid system to get care paid for, and so you had to learn an awful lot of things.
It was a very fast learning track. And when we did find Marcia, there's a whole chapter about her in the book because it was such a huge event. When we did find her, you know, at this point, I was in despair. I didn't believe that I could find anybody that could do
that
this
could deal with
job.
your mom, right?
And when we found her, the revelation was that Marcia fell in love with my mother as she is, or as what she had who she had become,
right now.
not who she was. You know, my mother was an intellectual. She was a political activist.
And
she was
you
very
had all
articulate.
those memories.
And I kept
the
needing
caregiver
her to
didn't.
be
Right.
that. And Marcia even renamed her. My mother's name is Laura, and Marcia named her Lolo, my Lolo. And it was so appropriate because she is a different person, but not less lovable in any way. She's just a different person. And when Marcia did that, I could feel my mother relax, and finally I could relax too and accept it. And that was huge.
And then after she relaxed, then I relaxed.
Then you could relax. But along the way, and we're going to get to how your son and daughter played a role, there were other stresses even dealing with, because one of the things you had carved out in your own life, you wanted to spend time at a house in Italy, but every time you would go, right, Jill was worried.
Yeah, we couldn't go. We couldn't go. Once this
and I think
happened.
a lot of families go through that. Taking a trip becomes a stressor.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that was one of the miracles of our situation. Our daughter, who was cooking for Laura in our apartment, is hearing an argument between us. We're standing there because we were offered a trip to Italy. We could go to our house. We hadn't been in almost a year. And Jill said, I just can't do it. I wouldn't have a good time. And Allison says, Mom, go to Italy. What are you talking about? And she said, I just couldn't do it. I'd be worried all the time. And Allison said, I'll be you. I can do your job. I know what you do. You handle the Medicaid, you pay this, you do that, you check in with this, you have to do this form. I'm in contact all the time because I'm cooking for them over there. I can do it. Go to Italy.
So she gave you permission to go, and you listened to your daughter.
Yeah.
She's a private chef, you know. So this is a perfect thing because
I was going to say, now in your family, it really has brought the generations together, because your daughter cooks for Grandma, your son comes to visit because he's in New York now.
Yeah, and
so for you, it really has worked out well.
Well, it brought our family together in a way that we never quite imagined it would. You know, Allison was in L.A. when this started to happen. Max was is a musician in New York. And we had just moved back to New York, and you know, we'd all been all over the place. We were in Italy a lot, and all of a sudden here we all were on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, you know, gathered around this little old lady who, you know, brought us together. It was kind of miraculous. I think she would love that happened.
That had happened,
yeah.
Right. Because I talked to a social worker, and she said very often people keep the grandchildren in the dark. They don't really share the details, and they say, tell them.
Exactly.
Tell them. You never know where that may lead.
They also have a window into what's going to happen to us.
Yeah.
You know, and they're going to have to deal with it. You know, I'm ready to become incapable shortly.
At any time. Right. Lessons you learned, what were the big lessons, you know, the things that really where you say, boy, that if I wish I'd known that, you know, 5 years ago?
I think the biggest one is that when you think that, you know, something terrible is happening,
it is.
Take a breath, and see how it's going to turn out, because in a way, I mean, my mother was she didn't hear well since she was her early 30s, so she talked all the time. She was a big talker, and she wasn't very comfortable with physical affection. And I always said to Mike, gee, sometime I would just like to sit and hold my mom's hand and not talk for a while. Well, guess what? My mom is aphasic. She doesn't speak very much at this point. She's incredibly affectionate, which she never was. So every day, 3 times a day, I get to go and sit and hug and talk and have this sort of big smile from her and this lovely, affectionate time with her. You know, and here I thought it was going to be this terrible tragedy that had befallen us. And I think one of the big lessons is, you know, whatever comes your way, it might turn out to be wonderful as well.
Toward the end of the book, Michael, you write that it was in Jill's, it was getting to relief and freedom, but also a sense of losing something. Freedom came in little steps. What are you saying there?
I don't remember.
I think
it's a lovely quote.
I think your point is that what you were saying there at the end of the book was that we learned that rather than am I going to live my life or take care of Mom, the answer is we're going to do both, and we're going to find out how to have happiness and freedom.
Oh, I see. So our freedom from the responsibility came in little steps, which is fine. You know, once you sort of take in the reality of the situation, and that was our biggest problem. There was denial. I supported her denial, and then after a while I started fighting it, but that was very bad for the two of us. If I was on the other side of this issue, that was very bad for us. We had to be on the same side, you know. But eventually, once we accepted the fact that this is what we were doing, we have plenty of freedom. Nothing was taken away.
Nothing was taken away.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have this blessing, you know, of having my mother still with me.
Still with you.
You
You get to check on her, right? And,
yeah.
But she doesn't know that you live across the hall, right? And
No.
She
She's
calls
surprised every time.
She calls me Lois, which is her sister's name, who's still alive actually, her 95-year-old sister in Indiana. She never sees her, but she calls me Lois. She calls Marcia, who's very tall and from Jamaica, she calls her Ethel, who's one of her other sisters. And
who the hell she thinks I am?
You have no idea, but she greets you affectionately.
She
every
does.
time.
She gives me a big smile.
But, so
every
she's
time.
surrounded by her.
And often you do have her over to dinner. Right?
Yes,
Yes.
and I think she feels safe and content, and and she's passed through the stage of being angry and frustrated, and so you know we're trying to really enjoy it.
Well, that's a lovely place to be and a lovely place to end this interview. Thank you both for coming in and telling your story.
Thanks.
Thank
It's nice
you.
to talk to you.
Lovely to talk to you.